Firstly, on behalf of Delaware, thank you for making the time to join the second in our series on how to become anti-fragile. For those who joined the first one, it was incredibly insightful. So if you did miss it, certainly look on the Delaware website and you can have a look and view the content that we presented. Before I hand over to Sean Cooley, who's going to take us through this session, if you do have any questions, I certainly encourage you to take advantage of the Q&A function. And if we have some time at the end, we'll address as many as we can. For those we don't manage to get to, we'll come back to you separately and answer those questions. So I guess without further ado, if I can hand over to Sean.
Thank you very much. Good to be here once again, and good morning, everyone. This is the second of a series of webinars that we're running. The first one was back in April, webinar number 1, where we talked about how we're living through a very transformative period in history. This one is going to really address the question, why are companies struggling with the level of exponential technological change? And it's going to lead us very nicely into the third webinar, where we're going to talk about, how to basically adapt both our mindsets and our actions in organizations so that we can learn to thrive in these disruptive times and not just survive. So the first webinar went through why is everything so disruptive right now. This webinar is going to say why are companies struggling to adapt to all of this disruption. And then the third one, we're going to really sort of answer the question, what can companies do to not just survive, but thrive? Now, I'm assuming that not everyone necessarily was at the previous webinar, so I'm going to do a little bit of a sort of recap at the start of this one here. So I'm going to start off. One of the things I think inspired me to sort of write my book Transition Point was really trying to understand why over the last sort of 200 years we've been through a massive period of exponential change, both in the number of people alive on the planet, the amount of wealth we've generated, both collectively and also individually. So really trying to figure out, if you look at these charts, each one of these sort of KPIs of humanity, effectively, this isn't what exponential looks like, and you can see it's almost like bent the curve of sort of human progress 90 degrees really. So exponential growth in people, in wealth, and the wealth per person. The question really I had was what happened here, and I'm going to use this image, which introduces the start of the first part of my book, Transition Point, to use that. What really happened there is because we learned how to industrialize. We created engines of revolution, as I call them, steam engines. So the picture on the left there is James Watt and his steam engine, and then Sergey Brin, who's the CEO of Google, and his search engine. So we've moved from steam engines to search engines. But it's that process of innovation and the creation of industrialization that comes from that innovation that has really allowed sort of humanity to take off like a rocket. But when you go beneath that, when you look beneath those sort of exponential increases, you find that technological process isn't linear. It's actually cyclical, and it comes. We talk about boom and bust cycles all the time. Economic cycles of boom and bust, and actually, if you go behind that, what they are driven by is a process called creative destruction. Innovators such as James Watt or Sergey Brin, they create new innovations, but that destroys the old ways of doing things. So the steam engine obviously enabled us to power the railroads, which destroyed sort of the industry around sort of carriages and horses and carts. The search engine has enabled us to search things, which has destroyed the yellow pages and industries like that, where everything used to have to be printed off. And we've been through 5 of these waves, from the first industrial revolution through to the age of steam and rail, all the way through to the computer age. And we're now in the 6th wave. But each one of those, as you can see in here, each one generates a new power source. It creates new transportation mechanisms, new communication mechanisms, and the combination of those usually comes together to create new industries. And it's the creation of those new industries that ultimately causes the destruction of the old ways of operating, the old paradigms and the old industrial models. And that process of creative destruction is what's created all that wealth, but also what's enabled us to grow as a species, because from that comes advancements in pharmaceuticals, in medical devices, in wealth, in healthcare, in food production, all of those sorts of things. Now, we're in the 6th wave, as I discussed, and something called the upswing period. And, like Peter Ratcliffe said, it's very important for us to understand sort of the history behind change so that we can actually understand what's about to happen, not just what has happened. And right at this moment, we're in this midpoint in the sixth wave upswing. And there's two phases of creative disruption in the upswing. The first phase is where new inventions are created and we play around with them. We generally try to think about how we can use these new tools to do the same thing we've always done, but potentially in a new way. So a lot of the focus is on efficiency. And then in the second phase, we really figure out how to use this new technology and what the real art of the possible is and its real potential is. So now we're starting to figure out how to use these new tools to do new things. And that enables us to completely reimagine how things are done. And that's what causes the real transformation and the industrial revolutions that we're going through. So the upswing really looks like this. We have sort of two major phases and a number of sort of sub stages within that. The first phase is all about installation. So we have this battle of the new paradigm against the old. We have concentrations in the new investment. People get very excited about technology and lots of money flows in there. If you've got capital to spare, then you've got the ability to invest, and lots of people make a lot of money really quickly. But the invention itself generally gets used in efficiency-based initiatives, and that means it ends up kind of underwhelming. So it gets caught in what Gartner calls the sort of trough of disillusionment. Everyone gets really hyped up, and then kind of nothing really happens until phase two, where phase two comes along and we see the real potential of that technology, and you see the sort of more widespread application of it gets led by production capital, and we get a new golden age effectively. The hairy period is the bit we're going through right now, which is the bit in the middle between these two phases, this sort of transition period, or what Carlota Perez called the turning point. This is where all the wars and all the revolutions and all the social unrest happens. And if you look at what's going on around us right now, you can see exactly those sorts of behaviors happening on. So we're getting battles between the old paradigm and the new paradigm, between, the new hegemonic forces such as China and the old ones such as the US. And you see all of this tension building. People with capital are winning big. People who with just their labor to sell, not so much. So you're getting a lot of social unrest. You get hyperinflation, and basically things feel very fragile. People's personal finances are fragile. Supply chains become fragile. Energy and food supplies are fragile. Economies feel fragile. Right now, of course, our peace is very fragile. Democratic institutions feel fragile, and our ecosystem, our planetary system feels very fragile. So it's not a great time in the wave cycle. It's one that we keep coming up to again and again. And that's one of the points that most people forget, is that because these waves reoccur, because it's cyclical, we've been through this before. So if we go back to the previous wave, the fifth wave, we can see we've got headlines like this that are not too dissimilar to exactly what we're going through now. We've got farmers protesting in London this week, but you've got, we had the winter of discontent back in the 70s, 3-day weeks. We didn't get the dead wasn't being buried in the UK. We had shops shutting, for days on end. We had fuel shocks. We had war in Vietnam. We had lots of terrorist activity. So all of this crisis that we're going through right now might be new to us, but it's not new. And for those of you who are my age, it's not even new to us because we remember it from the last time round. But then what comes out of the back of this, all of this disruption, should be this second phase where inventions are turned into innovations and they become industrialized, and we get a really new period of hopefully of both peace and prosperity, but also a technological golden age. And we've seen this through all of the other different waves, from the Industrial Revolution, which had the golden age of canals and industry, into the second revolution, where we had the golden age of rail and steam, through to the lapel epoch, the golden age of the automobile, and then we had the golden age of telecom and computing and all of the peace that came with Pax Americana. And right now, if things go as planned, we will have a digital golden age, the age of artificial intelligence, robotics, and the internet of everything. And we can see all of these technologies around us. And we, go onto LinkedIn or you go onto YouTube and you see videos talking about, the power of AI and the power of robotics, but we don't see them necessarily affecting our everyday lives, although they're starting to. And when that does happen, when we hit that tipping point, then something called Amaras law is going to kick in, which is that we tend to overestimate the impact in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. So in phase one, we see these technologies, we see all these headlines, we get very excited about autonomous cars, for example, or collaborative robots, but we don't see them. We hear about food being delivered by drones, but you don't see it. But then in phase two, suddenly, very quickly, they go from being very rare to everywhere. And right now we're at that apex point. So that transition period is right in the middle where, we've basically become a little bit disillusioned about certain technologies because we've been hearing about them for a while, but we haven't actually seen anything yet. But very soon we will see them. And not only that, we'll realize that actually we were underestimating their true potential. Give you some examples of the difference between phase one and phase two. If I look at power, because I talked about power, communication, and transportation being the three sort of macro technological shifts that happen in each wave. If we look at the sixth wave, what have we seen so far? Well, we've seen a massive push towards more renewable energy sources, solar, wind. But neither of those are new. They're not new energy sources. We've had solar power for a long time. We've had wind. Wind has been powering means of production for centuries. None of this is new. What's really happened is we've had greater efficiency. So the price per kilowatt for solar energy has come down. The ability to capture solar energy from the sun has increased. Same with wind. But what's coming in the second phase is a real transformation. This is the stuff that will, continuously, transform the world we live in. And these are all things we generally tend to hear about. We've heard about fusion for a long time. We've heard about small modular nuclear reactors. You may or may not have heard about space solar, but these things have been talked about. Inventions have been proven, but they haven't really impacted our everyday lives yet. But they will. In phase two, we will start to see these become industrialized. Communications, one of the ones that's very similar, although we have probably seen something close to a revolution around communication, certainly from things like smartphones or the medium that I'm communicating with you now. I think communication got almost like a steroid injection, really through COVID, because the need for that technology was accelerated during that time period, whereas I think it would have rolled out a lot slower. But now, of course, when no one can leave their homes, we needed another mechanism to communicate with each other, and Zoom and all the other tools like Teams suddenly became an absolutely essential for society. So it got a real accelerant. But the real transformation is what's coming down the road, which is the Internet of Everything, where we put sensors and everything. So we have a complete digital twin of our world, where augmented reality and virtual reality go from being niche products to being, something that we use continuously, where the physical world is consistently overlaid with the digital world, and we get, information at our fingertips all the time, where we don't have to learn how to mend a machine, for example, because the instructions are being beamed right in front of our faces, those sorts of things. That does feel like a revolution. And then finally, transportation. So the revolution in transportation so far has been EVs, but EVs aren't new. The electric vehicle came out just after the internal combustion engine. What has happened really is that a charging infrastructure has been developed, and Tesla made them cool. But it's the same sort of car on the same sort of road, handling the same sort of number of passengers and still requiring a human driver. So it's not really a transportation revolution, but what's coming is a revolution, an autonomous revolution, whether or not that's road transportation or sea transportation or air transportation or freight transportation. And there are also major projects going on, moving things like under the ground. So, the Cargo Souterrain, the major Swiss infrastructure project that's taking freight off the road and putting them onto sort of maglev transportation devices through huge tunnels cutting through the Swiss Alps, or the Hyperloop. These sorts of things, again, we hear about them, but we don't see them. And in the second phase, what we're going to start to do is start to see these. They'll go from, as I say, from quite rare things to absolutely everywhere, very, very quickly. Artificial intelligence is the thing that we're talking about right at the moment. And the first phase of the sixth wave, it was very narrow. It was Siri on your phone, or Alexa on your Amazon Echo, or the other various FBI listening devices we have in our houses. But in phase 2, of course, what we're seeing is something that's really transformative. We're seeing sort of artificial intelligence, elements coming such as machine learning, which has driven us into deep learning and neural networks, which has created generative AI, which sits atop these large language models. And we're seeing this being embedded into our search engines with things like Copilot. There's been, assistants are being created. And it's a real transformation. And what we've seen just in literally 18 months has been things like text-to-text systems like Grok or, the ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude Free, text-to-image, so DALL-E 3 or Midjourney, be able to just type out a description of an image and for the artificial intelligence to create it for you. Text-to-video tools like Sora or Veo, where again you describe something by text and it will create a video that's almost indistinguishable between that and real life. And now text-to-music, where there are websites, Suno or Udio, you can go to at the moment, and people are creating songs and the artwork to go with that song simply by being able to describe the style and the types of music they want to hear, and putting some lyrics into the system, and it will create it for you. It'll even create the lyrics for you. And what we're seeing is all of these tools now competing. But the really interesting thing is they're converging together into something called multimodal AI. And that's enabling us to really, really approach the level of human intelligence, or what they call artificial general intelligence. And to be fair, I think we've kind of reached it. And we've reached it in really just like 18 months. So if you think back to only, say 18 months ago, sort of the 5th of December in 2022, Sam Altman announced on what was Twitter then that ChatGPT was launched, and it crossed 1 million users in a few days. But now we have something called ChatGPT 4.0 or for Omni, and that's able to really bring people's imaginations to the forefront, because what they're seeing is some real science fiction made real. So if you're aware of the movie Her, for example, where you have this gentleman has an artificial intelligent, effectively girlfriend, and a lifelong companion, we're kind of at that point really. I'll give an example of this. So last week, an example of GPT 4.0 was announced. This is a bit, there's loads of different examples. This is not the most impressive one, but it's just, I'm using this one because A, it's quite short, and secondly, there was a comment made in the YouTube video that I thought just summed up exactly the sort of rate of change we're about to go through. So I'd like to play the video if I can, and then what I'd like to do is basically, show you what I mean by the comment.
We asked the live audience on X to submit few requests for what they would like us to try out here. So I will take a couple of prompts. Okay. Bot Gasper wants to know if GPT 4.0 is capable of real-time translation. Mike, you want to try this one?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Yeah,
I speak Italian, so we can just do English, Italian.
Italian. Sure, let's do it. Hey, ChatGPT, how are you?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. How about you? How's your day going?
I'm doing great. So I would like you to function as a translator. I have a friend here who only speaks Italian, and I only speak English. And every time you hear English, I want you to translate it to Italian. And if you hear Italian, I want you to translate it back to English. Is that good?
Perfetto.
Mike, io mi chiedo se le balene potessero parlare, cosa ci direbbero?
Mike, she wonders if whales could talk, what would they tell us?
They might ask, how do we solve linear equations?
Potrebbero chiederci come risolviamo le equazioni lineari.
Sicuramente sì.
Certainly, yes.
Great. Looks like it works.
So instant translation, 40, 50 different languages that can translate automatically at that speed. And you'll notice the way the AI talked. It talked like a real human. And there was this comment that I saw that was just underneath that someone, an Italian person, I guess, said, the accent's a bit off, but it will be serviceable, I guess. And then the person who commented afterwards basically said, it's the worst it'll ever be. And I thought that kind of really resonates with one of the points that I made last time. I'm going to make again this time, that, things will never again be as slow as they are right now. The rate of progress we're getting right now on this stuff, this is as slow as it's ever been. The translation you've just heard, that's the worst it'll ever be. It's only going to get better from that. And that's going to create huge amounts of wealth. So one of the charts I showed at the start was the exponential rise in wealth that capitalism has driven and industrial revolutions have driven. And we can see that, you know, the sums of money that the tech companies alone are going to be able to obtain through artificial intelligence, and it's now becoming at the core of each of their products, is just, you know, enormous. You know, tech titans are up 36% the past year and have added 2.4 trillion of market capitalization, you know, in just like the past year. And it's 2.4 trillion. That is almost an unbelievable amount of wealth generation right there. And they're going to, you know, embed that kind of technology into robots, and that's exactly what's happening here. So human robots plus generative AI is going to lead to a sort of period of exponential growth, and they're going to combine together the following technologies: speech recognition, language translation, vision and image, haptic capabilities, and then all of that Gen AI reasoning is going to be put into robotic bodies. And what we're seeing is that robots aren't being programmed anymore. They're actually becoming learning systems. They're increasingly able to understand physics and understand the physical world. And we're going to get to a point very soon where AI systems will be designing other AI systems, and these AI systems will be placed in amongst machines. And we can see already that that's happening with partnerships between companies like OpenAI partnering with humanoid robot makers like Figure, and Sanctuary AI doing a collaboration with Microsoft. There's going to be Copilot and tools like that inside their robotic systems. And it's going to create effectively humanoid robotic labor as a service. And I always get asked the question, why humanoid robotics? Why do we need robots to be humanoid shaped? And it's basically because we live in a human shaped world. Our entire world has been built to satisfy, you know, bipedal, you know, mammals between the sort of 4'6" and 6'5" that have, you know, basically 2 hands and 5 fingers, you know, on each hand. Creating robots that look like that and behave like that means that they can adapt to our world incredibly quickly. So, as a little bit of a quote here for those old enough to remember it, you know, Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore. And we're going to have a new industrial revolution that's going to come from this, an automation triple whammy. Whammy number one is going to be the, you know, automation of physical tasks through all of these robotic tools. Whammy number two is going to be mind to machine, where, you know, artificial intelligence starts to automate knowledge-based tasks. And whammy number three is the bit I've just talked about, the convergence of those, where machine brains are driving machine hands and machine trucks and all these other things. So we're going to get a automation of the end-to-end supply chain. So phase two supply chain innovations are going to be really transformative, but only for those who are able to create value from them. And that's the problem. Because the future supply chain is something I call the PAL supply chain. It's going to be incredibly personalized. Products are going to be much more personalized. They're going to be made by automation, and they're going to be more local. And when I used to talk about this, people always used to go, yeah, I get the customization bit, and, you know, you just show me loads of videos about robots and stuff, so I get the automation. I'm not buying the local thing. I think we're in a globalized world. Globalization's here for staying. We're always going to buy everything's going to be made in China, and we're going to ship it halfway around the world. People don't say that anymore. That I'm not challenged on that anymore. People can see that the nearshoring and reshoring revolution is taking place, and that we can start to use automation to basically be competitive on a global scale, even though our human wages might not be as competitive as people out in the Far East, for example. And the good thing about the PAL supply chain is the shorter, the stronger, and more agile and more sustainable the supply chain would be. So the future will look nothing like the past. And as I said earlier, things will never again be as slow as they are right now. And that's a problem. That's a problem for most organizations. Why is it a problem? Because while technology might increase exponentially, we don't. You know, our people don't, and our organizations generally don't change at that kind of rate. So there becomes a gap between technological exponential growth and the ability of people to take advantage of that technology. And worse than that, most organizations are actually still pretty fragile. They're still weighed down by functional industrial age mindsets, methods, and management styles, which leaves them really exposed in this oncoming wave of disruptive change. And it's to these sorts of organizations I'd like to talk. And because actually most organizations are in that state, in that fragile state. They've got analog mindsets in a digital world. And I particularly like this quote, and it's a bit of an old quote. It's about 15 years old now, from Gary Hamel in a book called What Matters Now. He said, right now, your company has 21st century internet-enabled business processes, mid-20th century management processes, all built atop 19th century management principles. And of course, he's correct, absolutely correct in that. And when we talk about supply chains, when we look at managing the supply chain, really, managing the supply chain in this sort of very disruptive world, we've got to really be able to play 4D chess. We've got to be able to make thousands of daily decisions on multiple variables. We've got to understand the strategy and the cascade of that strategy through the multiple layers in our organizations. But we've also got to make sure we align it across the end-to-end supply chain. We need to understand the supply chain strategy, the performance metrics, the network, processes, systems, and resources. And we need to be able to codify all of the different strategic trade-offs we want to make. Are we prioritizing low carbon over low cost, or sustainability over speed, or agility over being lean? What is the driver here? And then we've got to develop a strategic playbook that includes all the mitigation tactics and contingency plans in the case that we have major disruptions and risks. And in this middle phase, this transition period, we've got a lot of disruption and risks, as I'm sure you'll agree. The problem is most companies can't do that. They're still stuck on a single plane. They can only see adjacent moves. They only think one move ahead at all time, because they're still very functional and very operational and not particularly strategic and not end to end. The trade-offs and wider implications of decisions and the unintended consequences and second order effects aren't thought about or considered, let alone understood. So people are constantly reacting to the outputs of their own decision making. Why is this still the case? Well, the reason it's the case is because, and I'm going to use a quote here from James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And that's as true at a personal level as it is at an organizational level. Why is that? Well, because mostly we're led from the top. And the people who lead most of our organizations were not trained to handle organizations going through periods of exponential disruptive change. They were trained to control the organization, to focus on efficiency, to drive out some profits through lowering costs. But now we're in this upswing period where the rate of change is exponential and the environment is chaotic and ever changing, which means that all of the measures and the skills and the organizational culture all need to change to adapt to that new environment. But that wasn't what they were taught. They weren't taught how to do that. So, they were taught in a world of certainty, but now we're in a world of uncertainty where things need to be somewhat different. We don't need to tighten the reins and control from the top. We need to free our people to be able to ask the right questions. Only, unfortunately, that is not what's happening. So whilst everything's burning, we're like this meme at the side here, which says everything's fine. It's not fine, because the vast majority of companies still operate with a short-term cost-focused mindset. They still have an inherent fear of taking risks. They're focused very myopically on quarterly analyst expectations, not on long-term value. If you want to innovate, well, that's fine, but innovate anything only on things that actually deliver an immediate ROI, which means it becomes a very short-term innovation, not particularly a big game-changing one. They're not strategically designing the flows through the supply chain from the customer back, not looking at the form and function of the inventory, only the quantity and the value of it, focusing on the efficiency of activities rather than the effectiveness of outcomes, and still operating in functional silos with disparate systems that don't talk to each other very well, different agendas and different metrics that both don't align and are counterproductive. And really what they're doing, and specifically in this very disruptive central period, is they're saying we're trying to play not to lose rather than playing to win. And these fragile organizations are very frustrating places to work, because they usually have a very unclear purpose and strategy, just focused on survival, which means there's very poor communication. And this lack of clarity results in a focus on functional efficiency. That focus on functional efficiency leads to bureaucratic and misaligned rules, procedures, systems, processes, and data sets. And because you've got misaligned processes, you end up with misaligned measures and targets. The leadership's always looking backwards at lag measures and averages, not looking forwards, which means there's really a lack of ownership and accountability for those outcomes. And the people within the organization get really frustrated. Functionally structured organizations are very frustrating places to work, because they're not trusted. People are not trusted. There's so much friction in the way things get done. Everything takes so long. People, because they're not trusted, they have to go and seek authority. And basically what happens is, you have major retention and employment issues, and you spend a lot of money, constantly trying to retain people, because they either quit or they quit and stay. And the execs get their results, and they see the results of the organization, and they might think, we're hitting the numbers, but what they don't see beneath the surface is all of the effort that's involved in hitting those numbers right there. We record our transactions, but the issues to actually get that, purchase order raised or to hit that sales order, are never really captured. The company develops no sort of organizational memory of the issues, their root causes, and how you manage to solve it. So while individuals' experience and knowledge might increase, the organization's collective intelligence really doesn't. And it's because it's a frustrating place to work, and because we keep having this churn, we're constantly losing good people and good skills. And the reason for that, in a lot of cases, is because people are spending most of the time firefighting. Functional organizations are firefighters. This is from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So some of you might recognize this quadrant of urgency and importance. And I've done loads and loads of business transformation programs, and I usually ask the question about where do you spend your time? And this is the average of all of the projects that I've done. About 61% say they spend their days fighting fires, and then 28% of their days fighting someone else's fires. So this is someone else's issues that they're having to get involved in. About 1% trying to find somewhere just to get a breather, and then only about 10% of their time doing planning and preparation. And if I was to ask them, what was it you thought you were going to do when you joined this organization, the activities that would come under Q2 there would be the things that they said that was what I thought I was going to be doing. This is what I want to be doing. I want to be doing some more deeper thought stuff, but I'm spending all my time just fighting fires and fighting someone else's fires. The trouble with fighting fires is you're constantly having to make immediate decisions. And for those of you who've read Thinking Fast and Low, you'll know that actually those are system 1 thought processes, not system 2 thought processes. So these are thoughts where, you've got to make a decision really, really quickly, but doesn't give us the time to think through the consequences. And we tend to rely very heavily on our biases and imperfect experiences. System 2 is where we have the time to sit, to think logically about a problem, to understand what the impact could be, the second order effects, the unintended consequences. And the problem is the more uncertainty, more volatility we have now, the more firefighting we do. The more firefighting we do, the more system 1 thinking we do, and the less systems 2 thinking. So what we get is we get a gap. We get a gap between the exponential level of decision making that is required in this period of disruptive change and the level of decision making that we're actually capable of. So the reality for most businesses, most fragile businesses definitely, is they're spending their time in this zone. They're not able to make the level of quality decisions that the market conditions determine that they should do. And I guess one of the questions most people say is, well, we've spent a fortune on technology. Surely that must be making things easier for us. And the reality is, no, not really. Unfortunately not. Most of the digital transformation programs that have taken place so far didn't really have much transformation associated with it. And in fact, a study here from Gartner, from Dwight Kaplick here, said 60+% of companies have plans to invest in intelligent automation, but about the same number also say we're not organizationally prepared for its adoption. And that's what's really happening. They're taking, the 21st century technology, as Gary Hamel said, and we're putting it on top of our 20th century organization. And that when we do these digital transformations, what's the 2 approaches we take? Well, either we're replicating existing processes and what we do already, or we're imitating what other people are doing. So we've got some consultants that come in and they're saying, basically what you need to do is you need to do what this organization over here or your competitor is actually doing. So there's not any really new thinking going on. And what's happening is, as we're adding in all of these new solutions, because we're functionally siloed, we've got a software solution for every problem. It's creating an increased level of complexity. So this is the Kearney's analysis on the level of different procurement software that's out there. And as you can see, it's made things much simpler for you. Only it hasn't. It's made it much more complicated. And therefore, the issues that companies are facing is all around the quality of the data and the integration of that data across applications. So what you end up is you end up slapping metrics on everything, and we've got great tools that visualize all of this data, And what we're really ending up doing is making problems look pretty. And the real important elements, the signal is lost amongst the noise. But it's also causing a lot of stress in organizations. All of these visibilities and all of these alarms going off, specifically things like MRP schedules, is just creating more pressure on people who are already overloaded by the sheer volume of change they're trying to adapt to. So without any clear focus on how it can deliver value to customer, a lot of this technological spend sounds like unicorn and rainbows. You're reading through the brochures from the software vendor and it sounds brilliant, and then you go to implement it and you think, hang on, we seem to be doing quite a bit of the work around here. I thought the software was going to do it for us. And very quickly you're feeling a bit of an ass when you realize that your culture of your organization and the way of working is just dragged down, and you're basically getting no value from that investment whatsoever. And you might say to me, yeah, Sean, what about all this data we have right now? Surely that must be helping. Yeah, not really, no. As we can see from this study from Signal of 1,000 C-suite leaders, the biggest problem with all of this data is all of this data. We have too much data and not enough time to do anything about it. And because we can't determine the signal from the noise, we just end up becoming overwhelmed. So while we do use data, we're not really becoming data-driven. We're using data in the same way that a drunk uses a lamppost, which is more for support than illumination. We're cherry-picking bits of data that correspond with what we already believe to be true. And specifically, executives are picking bits of data that agrees with their argument. So, we're not really letting the data tell us a story. We're just cherry-picking the data that tells the story we wanted to tell it. And then we say, yeah, but we spent a fortune on a data lake. Yeah, but most of those data lakes have now already turned into data swamps. And there's some really bitter pills for a lot of organizations to swallow. Just because you built a data lake, it doesn't solve your bad data problems. It just gives your bad data somewhere to live. And in fact, what that does is we think lots of data scientists was the coolest job in town, but a lot of data scientists are leaving because they're spending 79 to 80% of their time not doing data science, but actually doing data hygiene, doing janitor work, cleaning up data and organizing it so that we can actually start to run a report on ourselves. So they're quitting. And the problem is, most companies are still operating with an analog mindset in this digital age. They're focusing on digitizing their existing processes and their existing ways of working, rather than actually transforming the way their business operates. And in order to maximize the potential of this new wave of hardware and software, what we actually need is new wave thoughtware. And when I speak to most companies and I ask them a question, are you actually digitally transforming your business, or are you just digitizing the old one? And most people will nod and go, the latter. We're just digitizing our old way of operating. And what I need you to understand really is the things that got us to this stage are not going to be good enough. And a lot of people talk about resilience. And quite controversially, I talk about the resilience is not enough, because resilience is the ability to withstand all of the shocks in this time period and then return to our previous state, undamaged and unharmed. But with the rate of change that we have right now, and where the future doesn't look like the past, we need to not just be able to return to our previous state undamaged, we need to be able to evolve and to adapt to a new reality. And I'm going to use the word anti-fragile here. Now, anti-fragile comes from a book called Anti-Fragile by a guy called Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Some of you may have read it. And he says some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, and disorder. There is no word that is the opposite of fragile, but let's come up with this word and we'll call it anti-fragile. And he says anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness, apologies. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same, but the anti-fragile gets better. So if we take this is last year's study from Gartner, looking at the impact that uncertainty has on revenue of companies. And we can see that 63% of companies experience a loss, 28% of companies have no loss or gain when there is uncertainty, and 9% gain. So the 63% will be your fragile organizations, the 28% will be your resilient or robust organization, and your 9% are your anti-fragile. And my call to you is, how do we become anti-fragile? And actually it starts with you wanting to be anti-fragile. Every organization is perfectly designed to get results to get. So a fragile organization is an organization that has I-shaped people in I-shaped functions, where its focus is on operational efficiency. The resilient organization is able to use these sort of T-shaped people that work across the end-to-end supply chains, and its focus becomes on the effectiveness of flow across the chain. And this is far better than being fragile. But I suggest the real opportunity of the age is to become anti-fragile, where we have X-shaped people, exponential minded people, working in X-shaped value networks, where it's all about creating more value for customers and stakeholders. So the fragile hates uncertainty because it causes disruption and they suffer post-traumatic stress. They're never the same again once the shock has hit them. The resilience is very good at managing uncertainty, which creates an effective response to it. But the anti-fragile loves uncertainty because it creates opportunities to learn, to develop new ways of working, and to go through what we call post-traumatic growth. So in this new wave, in the second phase of the sixth wave, the fragile are going to struggle, the resilient will survive, and the anti-fragile will thrive. And it's important that we learn, because as this, Roosevelt once said, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. So all the disruption of this phase actually give us a great opportunity to become really good at delivering value, really good at managing change, really good at being able to understand how to use these disruptive technologies. And it's really important that we do, because the rate of change isn't going to slow down. Things are not going to get any easier. Industrial age companies are probably not going to make it. So how do we become, an organization that not just survives this phase, but thrives? We become anti-fragile. So we need to go beyond resilience, change our mindsets in order to change our future. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next webinar, which is how do we move away from fragility and become anti-fragile. Thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to Tim.
Thanks, Sean. As expected, incredibly insightful. So thank you for that. And certainly there's some takeaways certainly for myself that I'll be picking up. We're kind of up to the time. So just want to say thank you, Sean, for the session, and certainly encourage everyone to join on the final round on the 27th of June to work out how we do thrive in this new world. So thank you for that, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thanks once again. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.